Hello. Right. Today we transition from the 18 degrees of the elder tree into the 18 degrees of the pine tree. So this presentation is about the pine tree. Now, the pine tree is the first tree of the fourth Aicme quarter of the year. So the next 5 trees all belong to the same clan or group, which is just what Aicme means. So this is the seeding time of the year. And I've got some diagrams that I'll show you in a little while with the PowerPoint. It'll go over some of the things I'm saying. So we're into the 4th and final quarter of the year cycle with the pine tree. And what's interesting with this seeding time is it's definitely the evergreen quarter of the year. It starts with an evergreen tree, pine, and it concludes with an evergreen tree, the yew tree. And it's the only quarter of the year that has 2 evergreens. You know, I'll show you a diagram later, but the evergreen trees in the Owen make a pentagram. They're evenly spaced, and there's an evergreen pentagram, and it's interlaced with another pentagram, which is the rose family. So your apple tree and your blackthorn and hawthorn and so on. They're anchored on winter solstice and summer solstice. I'll show you that with a chart. But so it's interesting that of all 4 groups of 5, all 4 Aicme, we're now into the Aicme that starts with an evergreen and concludes with an evergreen. You know, it's the only quarter of the year that has the 2 evergreen trees. There's also a relationship, I think, with the birch tree, which is the first tree of a new cycle, if you like. So this Aicme will take us all the way to winter solstice in the yew tree. And that's the end of the cycle. But the winter solstice is the rebirth too. And when a new cycle, new Owen Grove year begins, it will begin with the birch tree. Now, both the pine and the birch were original pioneer trees in the British Isles. And it's interesting that in the dark half of the year, the 2 groups that there are pioneered by pine and pioneered by birch. So birch and pine pioneer the darker half of the year, if you like. And what's unique with those 2 trees as well, apart from being pioneer trees in the British Isles, is that they're the 2 trees that fly agaric mushrooms, Amanita muscaria, belong to. You know, the red mushroom with the white dots, it's only there with the pine and with the birch. So what do I mean by pioneer tree then? So originally, going back thousands of years, the British Isles was all under ice, a frozen landscape. You know, there was the last ice age. And when the ice began to melt, the first trees that traveled north with the better climate from the Mediterranean or North Africa, when they got to the British Isles, the first trees were pine, birch, and the juniper. Juniper's more of a shrub, bush, you know. But those 3 trees, the pioneer trees, the debris from them, from the fallen leaves of the birch tree and the dropped needles of the pine and the dropped pine cones, all of that would just eventually rot down and become the soil of the forest floor. That was that initial forest floor created by birch and pine sets up a carpet or a path that other trees can then follow. You know, so you can't have the oaks and the ash trees and the holly trees without pine and birch and juniper bushes taking over the frozen landscape, or you know, they're the first ones there. So that's what's meant by pioneer trees. They were the first trees to encroach onto the revealed landscape, the virgin landscape after the Ice Age. So I've had a look, I dip in and out of it to try and find any references to the pine tree in the stories of Ireland and Wales and so on, Celtic mythology, and I haven't found any. And it's strange because it's obviously a very important tree. And ancient Ireland had a group of laws called the Brehon laws. And the Brehon laws list different trees, and the highest group of trees are called the chieftain trees or the noble trees, and pine is one of those. And there were serious penalties by law if any of the chieftain trees were cut down. And so pine is up there with the other 6 chieftain trees. So it was valued, but it doesn't seem to have any obvious relationship to any Celtic god or Celtic goddess that I can find so far, without really being super nerdy and reading through every story and looking for any reference to a pine tree, you know. However, its most valued thing to ancient people is timber. It's as simple as that. You know, you look at Scandinavian countries, you know, and everything's made out of pine. So the first homes and the first shelters, not just fire, you know, the pine cones are brilliant fire lighters and stuff, but it would give you timber, you know, which if you've, you know, yeah. So it's that very practical use, I think, that would be why there were fixed penalties for chopping pine trees down. You know, it was very useful. Now, modern day stuff, there are herbalism with the pine needles. You can drink pine needle tea. It's something like 5 times higher in vitamin C than lemon juice. You know, it's a Native American cure for scurvy and things like that, you know, the pine needle tree. It's a disinfectant and all the rest of it. There's multiple uses with it. And of course, it's a food. You know, you can eat the pine nuts at the pine cones as well. So it's a food that's accessible to people. So without much Celtic lore, obvious mythology in it, I'm left with the star law position and its position in the year. But I will look at the Briatheroan reference in a minute. In the year of the wheel, in the wheel of the year, pine goes from 9 degrees Libra to 27 degrees Libra. So it's the only tree that is completely Libra. And Libra, when the sun enters Libra, that's autumn equinox. Then that happened with the elder tree, and now we're completely in the days of Libra. And the next tree, the gorse, will take us from Libra into Scorpio. So pine's the only tree that's completely balanced and harmony, and it's governed by, or Libra is governed by, the planet Venus. So it's the planet of harmony and beauty and peace and stuff. Now, we can look to other cultures, you know, especially with the bardic tradition. And the bardic tradition is late medieval, so they were fully aware of classical Roman, classical Greek traditions and stuff. So the pine tree does play a part in the mythologies of the ancient world. I just couldn't find anything Celtic to do with it. I'll talk about some of that further on as well. So with the Briatheroan, which are the word kennings from Ireland, the Briatheroan for Ailm, or the pine tree, it's spelled A-I-L-M. So I pronounce it Ailm, and it might not be pronounced that way in Gaelic. And it's not certain what the word Ailm means. Pine tree is the usual given for it. And the three word kennings then, the first one is the loudest groan. You know, the thing with this Aicme, the final Aicme, is it's all the vowels. All the vowels are lumped together in the Owen, and pine is the first one, A, the letter A. And it's funny how lots of alphabets begin with the letter A, but they don't all lump their vowels together like the Owen does, you know. So anyway, think of the letter A, and so the loudest groan is ah, that kind of thing. The next Owen word kenning is the beginning of an answer. So someone's asked you a question and you're going to say a football or a rabbit, or, you know, the beginning of an answer is a, it's the same A thing. And the third one is beginning of calling. So that's maybe not, I guess that's A as well, but to me, the beginning of calling would be a deep in-breath, wouldn't it be like, before you bellow what you're going to bellow. But they all seem to refer to an expression of sound, you know, and here we are with the 5 vowels, and A is the first one. I think you could equate it with that kind of eureka moment, you know, that, or the first cry of a newborn baby, you know, that's that ah. And so that's what pine is, Ailm is. In the Scholar's Primer, which is 1390 AD, it says pine, but the Gaelic words it gives for it translate into English as just grand. You know, just grand. You know, it's the big, you know, the pine tree is the biggest tree in Ireland and Scotland, you know, so it's just grand, it's huge, it's big, you know. And so there you have that. So then again, there's no law there about gods or goddesses or stories that we can cling to now, but what we do have with the trees of the Owen in this quarter of the year, there are clues in the trees. For instance, and I'll show you with a diagram further on, after pine, we have gorse and heather. And they're a niggle to some people because they're, strictly speaking, not trees. So when you hear the Owen being a tree alphabet, people say, well, gorse isn't a tree and heather's definitely not a tree, you know. But these are the shrubs or plant life that are there. And the thing is with gorse and heather is they are specifically heath bushes, heathland, wildland, you know, they're not thick forest of trees, they are the wild heath, you know. And so, and all that corresponds with Samhain, you know, and the time of year of the wild hunt. Now, you know, the heathland is the land of the wild hunt rather than through the thick forest where you can't really gallop, you know. You can chase a stag or a white hart through the wild heath on your horses, much easier than chasing it through the thick woodland and stuff, you know. So I'll show you some diagram that really kind of suggests that this quarter of the year until winter solstice is the hunting time, and the wild heath of gorse and heather is part of that, you know, and it actually lends itself to quite beautiful visualization imagery, you know, which we use, and it's just purely based on the tree sequence and the time of year and the star law of that time of year, you know. So I'll show you, it's easier to show you that with the charts, so I'll probably go into that shortly. Yes. I'll just put do the file share thing, get a PowerPoint up. Okay, so this is the basic poster for the Owen Grove. And first of all, I want you to look at the bottom and at the top. At the bottom, there's a red bull with his horns, and at the top, there's a white hart, a white stag. Now, these two animals are taken from Iron Age Celtic iconography. Two main sources, one in Gaul, 3rd century AD in Gaul, in which Cernunnos is depicted with a bull and a stag. And also on the famous Gundestrup cauldron, the Cernunnos figure is depicted with a bull and a stag. Now, this is only a theory, but theoretically, the two creatures, the bull and the stag, represent the two halves of the year. If they cut the year into half, simplistically, you've got 6 months of summertime and 6 months of wintertime. And the logic is this: the summertime belongs to the bull because the bull is a domesticated animal, and it was the tractor of the ancient world. It was used for pulling and ploughing, dragging heavy things. It was your agricultural, useful companion. You know, the bull represents the ability to do farming and shift heavy weights and all the rest of it, plough fields. And curiously, the 6 months of summer from the Celtic perspective begin with the sun in the sign of Taurus, Taurus the bull, Beltane. You know, so that makes it a summer representation. Now, the opposite to the bull is the stag. The stag is everything the bull isn't. It's not domesticated. It's a wild animal, you know, and quite sadly, you know, it's the creature of the hunt, you know. So in the 6 months of summer, you do all your farming, domesticated crop growing, and in the wintertime after harvest until the following spring, the only logical way of providing for your tribe or your family is the hunting, you know. So the stag becomes this symbol of the wintertime, you know. Now, in the stars, there are different groups of stars, not the zodiac, but constellations. So there are summer stars and there are winter stars. And the winter stars are called the winter hexagon. There's 6 bright stars, but the main story that they tell are the winter hunter and his hound, and they're hunting. And those winter hunting stars are in the sky throughout the winter time, you know. So the winter was always the time of the wild hunt, you know, and that means different things to different pagans, of course, you know. But from autumn equinox onwards, starting with pine then, which if you look at the poster, autumn equinox is at 9 o'clock with the elder tree, and pine is going to take you up to the white stag, where the white stag is midwinter, you know. So you can see how this quarter of the year begins with pine and concludes with the yew tree at 12 o'clock, you know. So this whole quarter is the wild hunting time and so on. Now, in the center itself, you'll see a dark green pentagram, and interlaced with it, there's a golden pentagram. So that's the dark green is the evergreen pentagram, and the golden one is the rose family pentagram. But they're also winter solstice and summer solstice. So we're into the quarter of the year that's going to take us through the wild hunt to the white stag, to the white hart, to winter solstice. Now, as a kind of creative visualization, if you like, you know, you could imagine starting at pine trees at the edge of a forest, you know, the pine trees take you to an open clearing. And then at the clearing, there's this wild heath, you know, and the wild heath is gorse, golden gorse and purple heather. And that's the hunting grounds, you know, and they correspond with Scorpio and Samhain and stuff. So this is the wild hunt that will lead you through the wild heath to the aspen trees. So the aspen trees have all sorts of lore with ancestral spirits and psychopomp methodology, you know, the spirit world, if you like. And it would take you to the very end of this Aicme, which is going to be the sacred yew grove, which is the conclusion, you know, it's the midwinter, it's the 12 o'clock position. So you could imagine chasing the white stag all the way to winter solstice. Now, here's the pattern played out by the 20 trees of the Owen in the cycle of the year, combined with the zodiacal star lore, but also with their Celtic mythology and other bits and pieces. So between oak and holly, about 11 o'clock, between oak and holly is Beltane. And it's in the light half of the year after spring equinox, you know. Now, if you look at the 3 o'clock position, there's an arrow pointing down from the elder tree, and that's where we are. We've entered the days of pine. Today is the cusp between elder and pine. And for this quarter of the year, it's the wild heath at Samhain, Scorpio. And it's going to call it descending down into the mysteries, the roots of the world tree to the yew tree. Part of this is seasonal, you know, for the Northern Hemisphere, this is the seeding time, the seeds go into the ground. And after yew, you will have the next Aicme beginning with birch, and there's a rising energy. So after the great descent into winter solstice, the energy starts to rise again with the birch tree and the rowan tree and alder and so on. And that takes us to a counterbalance to the wild heath, which is the water's edge. You know, the two trees that love water, which is alder and willow. And they're connected with the sign of Pisces and the salmon of wisdom and all of that. So there's this rising, descending down into the wild heath and the wild hunt, and then rising up again through the waters back to spring equinox. So we're right in that kind of descent into the mysteries and all the different things we're going to learn from this. This is the red squirrel, and it only survives in pine trees, you know, so it's close to being an endangered species. At some point in time, the grey squirrel was brought over from America to the British Isles, and it's a much hardier squirrel, the grey squirrel, and it can survive on all sorts of different food things, whereas the red squirrel pretty much survives on pine trees and only pine trees. So gradually the poor red squirrel's being pushed further and further north, and mostly Britain, England is mostly grey squirrels now, you know. So things to think about then. It's frustrating that there's no obvious Celtic lore with the pine tree, but looking at the classical world, there's a famous magical wand called a thyrsus, and it's a wand with a pine cone on the top, and it's a sacred symbol, magic wand of Dionysus, also known as Bacchus to the Romans, you know. So you could then maybe contemplate, okay, who's the Celtic Dionysus, who's the Celtic Bacchus, and how would that relate? But certainly in the previous Aicme, we went through the triple goddess in a kind of descent into the mystery traditions. And pine is almost holding that Bacchus, Dionysus mystery tradition, masculine energy, but it's also the kind of energy of Osiris, dead and dismembered. You know, there is this kind of going into the darkness. It could be like Chlai being speared by Blodeuwulf's lover and before his rebirth on the Will Tree, you know, different ideas there. You know, that the golden eagle in Scotland will nest in the pine trees of Scotland, you know, so that fits in with the Chlai story too, where he descends as an eagle into the arms of Gwydion to be reborn and stuff. So I'm just guessing, I'm clutching at straws really, that the pine was sacred even in ancient Mesopotamia. You know, there's wonderful carvings of Mesopotamian Assyrian temple guards, and they hold little buckets in their hands and pine cones, and they dunk their pine cones into the bucket and sprinkle sacred holy water around. It was their way of creating a sacred space, you know, and pine can be that too, of course. Its resins are wonderful way of doing incense and clearing space as well, you know. So some ideas there. When we do a meditation, I think it would be fun to maybe look ahead and imagine going from the pine tree through the gorse and heather to the aspen trees and the yew tree and the white hart. That might be nice to kind of plot out what's going to happen between now and winter solstice. So I'll stop recording and you can put your microphones back on.